Oh yeah, arts and sciences, humanities.
Well, do you know friends that went over there when they came back? They were so different that you just
Well,
didn't talk to
Gary,
them
yeah,
anymore.
Gary was the one I mentioned earlier. Just our interests were different. His experiences were different. We didn't relate anymore because we were real close in high school. When he came back, he went back to the University of Washington again. Got into law enforcement. I never really heard from him after that.
Does that make you sad?
Our lives just went in different directions.
Do you think if you had survived from the war, that how do you think things might have been different for you?
If I'd done what?
If you had gone to the war and
I
survived?
have no idea. I don't think I'd have survived, frankly.
How come?
Because you know what a coordinated klutz I am. I'd have tripped falling off the plane and they'd have shot me before I hit the tarmac.
Get over with quick.
Yeah.
Okay.
Dead before I touched the ground.
Were you opposed to the war?
Yeah, at the end, you were glad when it was over. It had drawn out for so long. And the whole purpose of it was lost. You know, in the beginning, everyone's gung-ho. We're going to go over there and kick communists around.
But war was never declared, so.
No, it never was. It wasn't in Korea either.
Really?
War hasn't been declared since December 7, 1941. How many have we been in since then?
Not very many.
So,
Did you ever do anything to protest the war at all? Never even signed any.
no, I'd sit and listen to some of the demonstrations. Mostly I would cuss the demonstrators when they'd block I-5 and you couldn't get where you were trying to go. You know, you grow up in an era where you don't protest and you don't question, and then you see a lot of people protesting and questioning, and I just didn't know where I fit into that whole thing.
How did the United States as a whole, society, change because of the war?
Well, like I say, it was the end of our political innocence. You know, right after Vietnam was over with, you had Watergate, and one sort of drifted into the other one with all of the presidential lying and deceit. And by the time Watergate was over with, which I think was 1974, we'd had almost 10 continuous years of war and political struggle and upheaval, and the country was exhausted. Psychologically, we were just tired people.
Do you think the war was worth it? Do you think?
Oh no, it wasn't worth it for anybody.
So do you think
war isn't worth it anyway.
Well, do you think it was wrong that we went in there?
I think that they were looking for a reason to go in, but it never was explained to anybody what was so important about that part of the world or that particular administration in South Vietnam, why we had to protect it. There was the domino theory, which was in effect in those days, that if you let one country fall, the next one to it will fall, and pretty soon they'll all fall, and the whole world will be communist.
How did you feel about communism then?
I couldn't imagine us as Americans ever falling under that type of regime, and therefore it was difficult to imagine or perceive the threat as being more than something that was isolated to the third world.
Were you afraid of nuclear war?
Oh yeah.
Did you have a
that
bomb
goes,
shelter or anything?
That goes, well, not as a family. We participated as grade school kids in some of those silly duck and cover things that you see sometimes and are made fun of on television now, but it was all very serious then. You know, because again, it's the age of innocence. You know, hide under a desk and a nuclear bomb's not going to hurt you.
Was that a big issue during the Vietnam War at all?
Well, it was an issue only, that was one of the things that kept the United States from making the political decisions necessary to go in and win the war. You don't get involved in a war unless you have clear objectives and you're going to go win it. And that was always a political thing. The whole Vietnam thing was political. It was never military. And you didn't want to invade the North for fear of bringing the Chinese down on you, all 2 billion of them or whatever was up there. And while they may not have been nuclear weapons could have conceivably been used to to stop the onslaught, and then you had the Russians involved in it. And so there was always the fear that if we fought this war to win it, we would involve all of the Soviets and all of the Chinese, and the thing would get even more out of hand than it already was. And so it was always a limited thing. Objectives were limited and necessarily failed because of that.
Do you think that the television coverage changed a lot of people's minds? I mean, in views and
Well, like you asked me that a minute ago, and like I said, I think that you just became immune to it. You know, it's just like any, programming has changed a lot in 25 years. You know, before it was Rocky J. Squirrel, and now on any weeknight you can see 35 or 45 people get slaughtered on primetime television.
Well, do you think a lot of the protests wouldn't have started if they hadn't had all this coverage?
Well, surely, but it was too big a thing. There were too many people involved, too many people serving overseas and getting drafted and sent away to keep it from, and the world media was involved in it, not just the United States media. You didn't have CNN in those days, but you did have the beginning of satellite coverage.
Did you ever sit there and watch it?
Well, it wasn't like it was you just saw it with Walter Cronkite on the evening news. You get your 5 minutes of Vietnam and your 5 minutes of sports. A few civil rights protests. That was about it in the 60s. We're taping a long dead spot right now.
I think that's it. I should have a conclusion.
I suppose you should. Your dad was a wuss. I can't make you proud by saying, I served overseas.
Well, that doesn't make
It was not a dishonorable thing, contrary to what they say about Clinton now. It was not dishonorable to avoid Vietnam. There were dishonorable ways of avoiding Vietnam.
Like how?
Like going to Canada, for instance, burning your draft card. And, there were ways that I don't think were proper. But to some people, that was the only option they had. They didn't have college as an option.
Well, how often did the government go after people who burn the draft card or?
Oh, they were getting arrested on a daily basis.
And what did they do with them?
I don't know. I never followed up on any of it.
Did they put
Jail
them in jail
time,
or
yeah.
send them anyway?
Well, sometimes both. One or the other. All of the above.
Do you think if the Vietnam War would have been today that they would draft women?
Draft women? I don't think they're drafting women now.
Well, that's because there's not a war.
Yeah. I think if Vietnam was today, I don't think Vietnam could be today because of our political outlook.
What do you mean?
Again, it has to do with that age of innocence. I don't think that the country...
But if there hadn't been a Vietnam then?
If there hadn't been a Vietnam then we might be more innocent now than we are. It's hard to say. Wars always have a way of changing a nation's course, and that kind of way people look at themselves and look at each other. The whole idea of protesting, the idea of people getting involved in government seemed to stem from that more than it had since the 30s, maybe. Am I rambling here?
No.
So your question is, if Vietnam was today, would women serve? Yeah, to some extent, probably. But I don't think if Vietnam hadn't occurred when it did, I don't think you'd have as much women's liberation and gay liberation and some of the other. The media didn't question things in 1964.
What do you mean by that?
Just what I said. The media questions everything now.
That's true.
Absolutely everything.
Do you think that's an improvement or not?
It sometimes can be an annoyance. It's necessary for democracy to have a free press. It's not that the press wasn't free, just the press wasn't moved to question, nearly to the extent that they do now.
So what did you read about before? Just basic facts?
Yeah, whatever the press release was from whatever government agency was the news of the day, and you just accepted it because your government never lied to you. And you found out one day that the government had been lying to you for years. The news media figured it out. That got them much more involved.
Did they lie a lot about facts of the war?
Well, there's been a lot of revelations that we were lied to about the whole Gulf of Tonkin thing that started it in the first place. That all of that was a contrived situation in order to give Johnson and
I don't understand what that was.
Gulf of